This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 550.
You know, I could go down almost any well-known brand and tell you what their strategy is. But when I end up with smaller organizations and freelancers, their strategy tends to be, you can pick anyone and I'm anyone. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. This is not a useful strategy. This is, I'm just looking for a job without a boss. And if you want a job without a boss, go for it. But the people on Upwork aren't treated with as much respect and dignity as they might deserve.
Are you tired of quick fixes and short-term thinking? Do you want to make a lasting impact but feel stuck in outdated systems? Whether you're an entrepreneur, a leader, or an individual with big dreams, today's episode will inspire you to think bigger, act bolder, and make a difference. Hi, I'm Jeff Brown, and this is the Read to Lead podcast, the podcast dedicated to your personal and professional growth. Today, we're tackling a topic that's often shrouded in mystery and perceived as exclusive to the corporate elite or military strategists. I'm talking about strategy, but as our guest today argues, strategy is for everyone who desires to create positive change in the world. We're going to be talking about Seth Godin's latest book, This is Strategy. That's right, Seth Godin is our guest today, and his book is a thought-provoking manifesto that breaks down this seemingly complex subject into digestible concepts, revealing the power of time, games, empathy, and systems in shaping our world. In his book, Seth encourages us to think differently about how we approach our work, our relationships, and the changes we seek to make. If you're new to the podcast, you may not know about my online Read to Lead Plus community, and I would encourage you to head on over to jeffbrown.me to find out more about it. The community is filled with people who take personal and professional development as seriously as you do. We have 2 live meetings each and every month, and they're recorded in case you can't attend those live. One, an Ask Me Anything hosted by me. The other, a guest expert session where we feature a guest expert, imagine that, on topics like leadership, marketing, mindset, strategy, artificial intelligence, and much, much more. You can sign up for a free 2-week trial right now when you go to jeffbrown.me. Get access to everything that's there, absolutely free for 2 full weeks. And if you decide to stick around, after that, it's just $9 a month. One more time, that's jeffbrown.me. This marks Seth Godin's 4th appearance on the Read to Lead podcast. And in case that name does not ring a bell for you, Seth is a renowned author, entrepreneur, and speaker, widely recognized for his insights on marketing, leadership, and the way ideas spread. He's written over 20 best-selling books. In fact, the one we're talking about today is his 22nd, including This is Marketing, Linchpin, and Purple Cow, and his blog is a daily source of wisdom for millions of people all over the world. Seth, I would say, has a unique ability to cut through the noise and offer practical advice that empowers individuals and organizations to make a meaningful impact. Well, Seth, this is our 4th time gathering over the last 11 years, and I am very thankful that you would agree to do this once, let alone 4 times.
Oh, you know, people don't realize just how hard it is to show up as regularly as you do. And it's not like you're just talking to movie stars. You're doing the work and doing the research. Thank you for doing it.
Well, my pleasure. I was going back over some of those previous conversations, and 10 years ago, you made a prediction, a 10-year prediction. So it's appropriate, I think, to revisit that. I had come out of radio a couple of years before that first conversation that we had. And we were talking about radio in particular and local radio more specifically. And you said that in 10 years, you believe that nothing important will be happening in local radio, and almost all the important audio production will come from something that looks like a podcast. Is that a prediction you still stand behind today?
Yeah, I think the first half is pretty clearly true.
Yeah.
Podcasting has stretched to include a kind of YouTube commentary and a kind of Spotify thing that isn't a podcast either. But if you're willing to give me both of those, I'll stick with that.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into the new book. This is Strategy. And I thought a good place to start was how you define it, maybe expand on the idea that it's a way of thinking about the future and how we shape it, and why that's particularly relevant in a world that's always changing.
Well, particularly appropriate for a podcast about reading and leading, because the thing is, I had to write a book about strategy because no one else ever has. There are books about tactics There are books about figuring out how to consistently meet plan. There are books about goal setting. But I am defining strategy the way I think strategy is understood, if you think about it, which is a philosophy of becoming. That there are systems, there's time, there are people, and there are decisions to make. And we are not given a guarantee that we're going to get what we want, but there's probably a path that's more likely than another one. How do we choose a path? How do we talk about a path? How do we build resilience and responsibility into what we're doing? Because we've been indoctrinated into not leading, but managing. And managers want plans, but leaders want a path.
You mentioned systems. Maybe expound on that a bit. Can you talk about, Seth, the role of systems in developing and implementing a successful strategy?
So systems are at the heart of why podcasting took over from radio. Systems are at the heart of how much a wedding should cost. I went to a wedding the other day that cost more than many cars put together. Why does a wedding cost what it costs? Well, the system says a wedding should cost exactly what your best friend spent, but a little more. Once that system concept is in place, then you get florists, then you get caterers, then you get round tables, then you get DJs, then you get pass around orders, none of which exists in the real world, right?
Right.
But those are all, everyone in the system is doing their best. Everyone in the system is saying, well, this is the best option I have. Another system to think about is the system that creates cheap chocolate. Halloween is people, strangers coming to your door, you give them something that you don't want to get in trouble for. So it's the regular kind. And the people who make the regular kind, Hershey's and Nestle's and the rest, they're under pressure to make something reliable and cheap. So their buyers push the people who grow to use less delicious and less resilient trees that have higher yield, and they pay as little as possible. And so the farmers employ their children, and it's just bad all the way down. But everyone in the system means well. So we need to see systems and how they change. So what happened with radio? Radio is built on a law of physics that says there's only a certain number of radio stations. If you have one of those and people are part of a system where information is valuable, that spectrum is valuable. And now that system keeps it moving for almost 100 years. And then all of a sudden, when the internet shows up, it gets rid of spectrum. So the system has to change because the thing the system was based on went away. So what we look for when we're defining a strategy is what systems are you working against? What systems are working for you? Can you describe the system and tell me if it's changing?
The concept of the smallest viable audience is central to your approach to marketing and strategy. How can identifying and serving this group be more effective than trying to reach everybody?
Well, I'll begin by saying, I don't think you can name a brand that successfully tries to reach everybody, right? That even Heinz ketchup or Kraft singles aren't for everyone. And the growth of salsa demonstrates this, right? People don't put ketchup on their tacos. And so when you put yourself on the hook and telling me who you are for, that means you've also told me who you're not for. So almost every successful podcast, except for a half a dozen that won the lottery, someone's going to win the lottery. It's not going to be you. Every successful podcast is for someone, not for everyone. And that's the opposite of traditional radio thinking, which is, I got the spectrum. How many people can I get in the room?
Right.
And so what I challenge people to do is have the guts to tell me who it's not for, because that puts you on the hook. It better be really good for the people it is for. If a stand-up comic bombs and then finds out that the audience only speaks Italian, it's not his fault and it's not the audience's fault. Right. It's the agent's fault. You were in the wrong room, right? And so if you walk into a Ferrari dealership and say, I need something to haul my 6 kids to soccer practice, they should not try to sell you an Enzo. They should walk you down the street to the Volvo dealership. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the only right answer. And so criticism from people who you weren't trying to serve in the first place just reminds you that you were serving the right people and ignoring the right people.
The book reframes tension as a positive force for strategic thinking. We should embrace it rather than shy away from it. Why is tension an important element in this process?
I use the word inflict in front of tension to make people even more uncomfortable. I think if you're trying to make a change happen, including leading a team, You are there to inflict tension. If I want to shoot a rubber band across the room, I have to pull it backwards before I let it go. If it's not under tension, it's just going to sit there, flaccid, and go nowhere. So if I want people to file their taxes by April 15th, I create tension on April 14th, which is if you don't fill this in, you're going to have to pay a fine, right? That when we offer change, some people are going to be stressed by this. And what we hope is that they will use that stress to move forward. But if you need everyone to be happy with you at all times, then you have to maintain the status quo. You can't offer any change at all.
What would you say, Seth, are some common misconceptions that people have about strategy, and how maybe can understanding those misconceptions help us make better plans?
I would start by saying an elegant strategy is easy to talk about, but hard to stick with. It doesn't need to be a secret. You can say it out loud and your competition isn't going to change anything that they do. Your strategy is not your tactics. Your tactics change all the time. Your tactics can be a secret. You can innovate on your tactics. But your strategy, that is the shining light that guides your overall decisions. So when I was at Yahoo in 1999, I was not in the room for this meeting, but they had a chance to buy Google for $10 million. Not billion or trillion, $10 million.
Crazy.
And they said no. At some level, this was the right decision given their strategy, but their strategy had become obsolete. So what was their strategy? Strategy was, the internet is a complicated, messy place. It's still under construction. So let's build a website that when people come, our goal is to get them to stay for as long as possible. 5 clicks, 10 clicks, 30 clicks. There's Yahoo Weather, there's Yahoo Cars, there's Yahoo Finance, there's Yahoo this and Yahoo that. So when Google shows up, Google's strategy is the web is ready now. So we don't want people to stay at Google. We're going to, in fact, post on our website how many seconds it took us to get you to leave our site. So it's the opposite of Yahoo's strategy. So Yahoo said, let's put the $10 million into Yahoo Kids instead. That was a strategic decision. It happened to be wrong because the changes in the internet meant their strategy was wrong. But announcing over and over again at Microsoft that we are the IBM of software, that no one ever got fired for picking IBM, for picking Microsoft, that Teams doesn't have to be cutting edge. Teams doesn't have to be the most cost efficient. It just has to be supported in the Microsoft way, and then we'll be fine. If they keep listening to that strategy has worked for 40 years and more, and will keep working as long as companies spend a lot of money on software. So, I could go down almost any well-known brand and tell you what their strategy is. But when I end up with smaller organizations and freelancers, their strategy tends to be, you can pick anyone and I'm anyone. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. This is not a useful strategy. This is, I'm just looking for a job without a boss. And if you want a job without a boss, go for it. But the people on Upwork aren't treated with as much respect and dignity as they might deserve.
You talk about the importance of understanding status and affiliation in systems, freedom from fear. What are some examples of how these concepts influence the choices that people make? So
I'm arguing that most people, once they have survival, a roof over their head, care about 3 things. Status, who eats lunch first, who's up, who's down, where do I stand in the pecking order? Affiliation, who's to my left, who's to my right. So at this wedding, one guy was in a tuxedo. He didn't feel good because he was the only guy in a tuxedo, right? If he had been at a different wedding and everyone else had been in a tuxedo, he would have felt fine. Affiliation, who's to my left and who's to my right. And the last one is the freedom from fear. Not things that make us afraid, but feeling like we're afraid. Those are the 3 things that will motivate most people to take action most of the time.
There are a number of examples in the book of people and organizations that have successfully navigated systems to create change. What are some common traits, would you say, of these successful change makers?
Well, here's a story that's not in the book, but I just read it and I loved it. Potatoes were discovered by colonialists in Peru 600 years ago. And they're one of the most extraordinary foods in the world. They're twice as efficient at getting calories out of the ground than anything else we can grow. They grow in a wide range of conditions. The problem is colonialists saw anything from Peru as risky and low status. So they were almost banned in England, and they were banned in France. One of the theories that people had before science was that each food did for your body what it looked like. So walnuts, you should eat walnuts because they look like a brain, so they're good for brain health. And they said that potatoes look like the growths that people with leprosy have on their fingers. So don't eat potatoes, you'll get leprosy. So this is a whole affiliation thing going on here with a status kicker, which is this is a low status food. You don't want to be seen as low status. No potatoes. This guy shows up and he believes that potatoes can feed a lot of hungry people. So the first thing he does is he somehow gets to the court of Marie Antoinette and gets her to wear potato flowers in her hair, thus signifying that there's some status associated with it. But then the second thing he did that was brilliant is he rented some farmland a few miles from Versailles and planted a whole plot of potatoes. And then he surrounded the plot with armed guards. But he intentionally did not have them have a night shift. So every night the guards went home and hungry peasants raided the high status guarded potatoes and discovered that they were delicious and nutritious. And so potatoes. When we see these steps, each one of which was a tactic, together the strategy was pretty clear. And we can see stories like this in business and politics and social settings. How do we understand what the system does versus what it wants? Because what it does is what it got stuck doing, but what it wants is a bigger thing. So they banned, after 147 years, they banned coal in Britain in September. And that's where they invented the coal plant, and now there aren't any. I think that's spectacular. How did that happen? Was it that every capitalist in Britain decided that coal was poison for the planet? No. It's that the people who are buying power don't care about coal. They just care about cheap and reliable. So when you had something else that could give them what they wanted, they were happy to walk away from what they'd been doing. And so we have to learn to dissect and understand not just what the system does, but what the system actually wants.
The book mentions elegant strategies. What makes a strategy elegant? How can we identify and implement that kind of a strategy in our work?
So there are two people who swim in the pool in my town. One person swims 2 to 4 hours a day, and his method is basically slapping the water as hard and as fast as he can. And there's a lot of splashing and not a lot of forward motion. And there's another guy who manages to do a lap in 3 or 4 strokes. And it's super elegant. It's like, it's like watching a shark or a whale. And what's the difference, right? The elegant guy is actually using less energy to go faster because he understands which part of his motion moves himself forward and which part just makes splashes happen. So an elegant strategy doesn't have a lot of splashes. An elegant strategy uses the system to propel itself forward. So we talk about the growth of Hotmail, and it was one of the first viral online sensations, free email. And at the bottom of your SIG, it said, if you want to get Hotmail too, click here. And it grew in 100 days like wildfire. It sold after less than a year, I think, for $500 million in cash, back when that was a lot of money. Their entire marketing strategy was one sentence, but they understood that the only thing you can do with email is send it to someone else. So the act of using their product was the advertising for the product. And by leaning into that, instead of running a Super Bowl ad, they found an elegant strategy.
You suggest that we shouldn't be afraid to fire our customers. Why is that sometimes necessary? And how can we do it, Seth, strategically, but also compassionately?
If you're not firing customers, then you have just announced we're for everyone. If you're not firing customers, you're saying, you can pick anyone, please pick me. What it means to fire a customer is simply to say, when I pick my customers, I pick my future. And you want something that I don't want. So if you've got a customer who comes into McDonald's and demands that you cater a party and that you want all the hamburgers to have 3 instead of 2, blah, 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 and no pickles, etc., you can say to that person, that's not what McDonald's does. That there's probably a local place down the street that will cater your picnic. That's not what we do here. That's a form of firing your customer. Another example, there was an investment firm, one of those big guys, and they did some research and they found that 10% of their customers accounted for about 90% of their customer service calls. And that most of those customers had very low balances. So we know what those customers wanted. And you could argue they made a small profit on those customers, but you could also argue it was fairly inelegant and it was clogging up all of the customer service that could be spent on people who were more aligned with what they were trying to build, which is a different kind of firm. So they wrote a letter, a kind but direct letter saying, We really appreciate the fact that you trusted us. We can't do a good job of helping you. Here's the phone number of 3 of our competitors. We can make it easy for you to transfer your money. Better to do that than to just punish people until they leave, right? And so if we can be clear about who it's for and what it's for, we can be kind to people who want us to do something that isn't worth all of the energy and risk we're going to take to do what we're doing.
You mentioned there are games in every strategy and list a few things about games that are generally true. And the last one caught my attention. It's bolded in my copy, maybe for good reason. Yep. We mistakenly spend more time figuring out how to win the game we're in instead of choosing which game to play in the first place. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. So let's just pick an example from real life, which is somebody's on vacation. On vacation, the clock is ticking, right? You only have a few days of complete leisure and freedom, and it's really expensive. And they're standing inside the place where they had breakfast, having a 5-minute argument with the server about whether or not there should be hollandaise sauce on the Eggs Benedict. Why are you playing that game? You might even be able to win that game. You might be able to teach that server a lesson. You might be able to get that server fired. Did you fly halfway across the world and give up this much time and money so you could play this game today? And we see this in business all the time, where a competitor shows up, a flaw arises, a problem shows up, and we swoop in to win that game because that game is winnable, as opposed to just letting it go and moving on to the next thing that is actually important. And some of the other rules about games: don't play a game you can't win, because that's just going to waste an enormous amount of time. I mean, you're welcome to play games for fun that you can't win. But if we're talking about the path that you're on as you lead, just let it go, because you're hiding when you have these arguments. You're hiding when you play these games because there's a bigger game that scares you. And that's the one that you really need to be paying attention to.
Just a couple more questions, if I may.
These are great. I love talking to you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. The book touches on the idea of community action as a way to create systemic change. Maybe you could elaborate on that concept and give some examples of effective community action.
Right. So if you're a white mouse or a gerbil in a science experiment, the system is in charge. You can't announce you don't want to press the little lever to get the little food thing. It's out of your control.
Right.
But we are not gerbils. And we are in systems, sometimes by choice, sometimes we don't have a choice. And it's easy to say, I'm a victim of this system, I can't do anything about it. But systems erect culture as a way to defend themselves, because systems like sticking around. Culture is people like us do things like this. So if you are people like us and you band together with other people and redefine what people like us do, the system has no choice but to respond. And it can be big and it can be small. If you are concerned because aluminum bats allow kids to hit balls so hard that people in Little League are being injured by them, and you want to switch back to wood bats, you don't need all the baseball bat companies to agree with you. You can just say, in our league, we use wood bats. It might be inconvenient at first, but you can organize the 10 people who run your league. And then you can get 10 other leagues to do the same thing. And if 20 leagues get together and ban aluminum bats, I guarantee you the aluminum bat companies are going to pay attention and something is going to change. But if one person says, I'm not going to use an aluminum bat, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. So when we think about the really important societal shifts that have happened in the last 200 years, right? Heartbreaking things that took way too long, like getting rid of slavery, all the way to tiny little annoying things, they were always addressed by community action, by 2 people leaning to 10 people, leaning to 100 people, leaning to a movement. And in the book, I give a couple examples from the world of social thing, but then I argue that we are not victims of the way industry and the economy are dealing with climate. We can create community action to put a fair price on carbon. If we did that, the market would notice. And when the market notices, it responds. It responds. You know, the market, as I said earlier, doesn't want to change the climate. It's a side effect of what it wants. If we put a fair price on carbon, which wouldn't take that many people, all of a sudden the metrics change, the system changes. And when the systems change, strategies change. When the strategies change, the world changes.
You provide examples in the book of both successful and less successful attempts to change systems, like the 100 days of kindergarten and the organ donation system. What key factors contributed to the different outcomes in those cases? What are the lessons that we can learn about the challenges?
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of those two. Okay. So a sterling example of a tiny group of people changing a system. If you have a 5-year-old or know a 5-year-old, it's coming up soon, probably in November. The 100th day of kindergarten is a big commotion. And the assignment is simple. You say to kids, bring in 100 of something. And the whole day is spent introducing them to the concept of 100. Because it's the 100th day we've been here. Here's 100 paper clips. Here's 100 Legos. It's a breakthrough idea. And we know the name of the woman who invented it. And then we know that she and a couple of colleagues wrote a small paper and a small newsletter about it. But because there was scaffolding, because kindergarten teachers have freedom to experiment, because the cost of the experiment was tiny, because if it didn't work, you weren't going to tell anybody, but if it did work, you were going to do it, and on and on. All of the conditions were right for an idea like this to be planted in fertile ground, and over time, probably 10 years, to thrive and grow. I juxtapose that with an idea I had years ago. A relative needed a kidney, and that caused me, and they weren't a blood relative, so I couldn't be on the list, but it caused me to look at the organ donation system. And it turns out that we have plenty of organs, we just bury them. And in the United States, there's an opt-in system. It defaults to, we're not going to touch your organs when you die. And as a result, they were coming up with really horrible ideas like paying poor people to donate their organs and stuff. I came up with an elegant strategy for how to solve the organ problem and worked with a well-known doctor, and we actually published a paper in Transplantation Journal that was then picked up by a Yale medical journal. And the idea is super simple, which is you have all the priority lists already in place of who gets the kidney first. Just add one more priority list that goes before everything else, which is the longer you've been a donor, the higher your priority to get one. So if you have a moral objection, don't worry, no problem, because you're not going to want a kidney anyway. But if you're the kind of person that could imagine one day you would want a kidney, you better sign up right now to be in the registry so that X number of years from now, you'll get the kidney. So this will put all this tension and pressure on doctors and patients to sign up today, the first day. And as soon as that happens, shortage is gone. You don't need the list anymore because there's plenty of organs.
Right.
So if this is such a great idea and we got it published in just the right place, why didn't it happen? It didn't happen because Jonathan and I didn't do the hard work of going to 40 conferences, of joining committees, of showing up. That the mindset of the organ donation community is not the same as the mindset of the kindergarten teacher community. Kindergarten teachers say, why not? Organ donation control, people say, better not screw this up. And those are two different mindsets. So could it have been adopted? No doubt about it. But I, unfortunately, was too selfish to spend 3 years of my life showing up and showing up and showing up to build enough scaffolding, because it has to be adopted widely or it doesn't work at all, whereas kindergarten can be adopted in one classroom.
You spent some time sharing about Robert Moses and the tactics he used to advance his agenda, often at the expense of marginalized communities. How can understanding those tactics, even if we don't condone them, help us navigate and challenge power dynamics within systems? Yeah,
so Moses started out wanting to do good. He started out as a civic reformer. And as Caro helps us understand, over the years, the title gives it away, all he wanted was power. He kept trading for power. But at the same time, he built more structures than you can see from outer space than anybody in history. He revolutionized the way cities and cars interact with each other. He got a lot done. So his methods could be used as a force for good, or they could be used selfishly to maintain caste roles. It's up to us. But I outlined some of the methods, and 99% Invisible has done a great job of describing some of these. So one of them is called stake driving, which is he would put down the construction stakes and sometimes even chop down the trees before a project was approved. And as a result, the status quo would shift from make him undo that to, well, it's already happening, it's too late.
Right.
And since it was a fait accompli, then the next thing would happen, and then the next thing would happen. Well, when we think about our projects, if we were going to wait as a leader for every single person in the organization to give it unanimous approval, it's never going to happen. On the other hand, if we are doing something that is generous, that can catch on, we can simply do it. And that doesn't mean everybody should walk around like a cowboy, but it does mean we often default to letting the system be in charge as opposed to, look, I did this. This is my contribution right here.
I want to wrap by talking a bit about artificial intelligence. You've written quite a bit about this. You've done some podcast episodes about it, including one that has a reveal at the end that I won't give away in case folks haven't heard it. How has the rise of AI and technology, would you say, impacted our understanding and application of strategy?
Well, we don't have 4 hours, but I will say a couple things. The first is, if you and I were talking about the internet when I started building internet products in 1989, it's very unlikely we would have talked about the internet of today. Right? Well, that's what we're dealing with AI. AI in 5 years is going to be as different from today as the internet of 1989 is from today. It's not going to be a slightly smarter or annoying search engine, and it's not going to be a hack that you can use to write a memo really quick. It is going to be a system unto itself, a very resilient, very powerful system that is going to change almost everything it touches, because it's going to do something it doesn't do now, which is it's going to connect us to each other. I wrote about this a little bit, but basically the internet does its best when it's connecting things, inter and net. Well, what happens if I got this book here, I don't need it anymore, I'm about to throw it out, and it says, wait, Jeff, who lives 3 doors down from you, he had mentioned in a conversation that he really wanted that book. Now, that's what a good friend would say if they were in the room. But now it's in the room, everyone's room, all the time. And we can be creeped out about that, but it's inevitable, because once we find how powerful and convenient it is, and our earbuds are in all day, people are just going to let it happen. People don't care about privacy. They care about convenience. So once it's connecting all of us to all of us all the time, I hope we can see that all the systems that are based on not knowing are going to be replaced with systems that are based on knowing. And that's going to transform risk, and it's going to transform leadership, and it's going to transform what we make and how we make it. So this is the moment to wake up and think hard about strategy. And one of the things I say in the book, I like Claude.ai much better than ChatGPT, which I find lazy and annoying. But if you go to Claude and basically say, I'm too embarrassed or afraid to talk strategy with a human, it's really good at talking strategy. Tell it what you're working on, outline your strategy, and say, put it in a doc so you don't get frustrated typing. Upload the doc and say, please tell me what is wrong with my strategy. Please tell me how to improve my strategy. And in 1 hour of going back and forth, you'll get $1 million worth of consulting help.
We talked about radio and podcasting's impact on radio. Do you see AI having an impact on books in particular, how we consume books, how we consume information maybe more broadly?
So I've been saying this for a little while, but it's happening faster than I thought, which is books are over. Books had a 500-year run, and what they're left with are two things. One, there's an infrastructure for the creation of books, and two, books are a signal. Like if I write a blog post, it reaches 20 times as many people as a book. But I write a book because I'm signaling to people, I'm willing to go on a podcast and talk about this. I think you should get 4 copies and talk about this. That effort is the main benefit a nonfiction book offers these days. And so what we've got is more books being published than ever before. The book system really floundering, with independent bookstores going away. And soon, as the backlist fades, publishers going away. And it's just going to get noisier and noisier like the podcast world did. Will there still be some lottery winners? Of course there will. But books changed the world in the 1600s and 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, that when Gutenberg made the Bible, it almost burned down Europe. That one book in people's hands was completely transformative. That isn't where the red hot center of change is anymore. And, as someone in their 60s, I listen to audiobooks more than regular books because my attention span is hindered now. But we're still going to have learning, and we're still going to have information. But the idea that we have to cook it for a year, put it on 250 pages and charge $30 for it, I'm hard pressed to see how that is going to be the future.
Right. Agreed. Well, the 22nd best-selling book from Seth Godin, out October 22nd, appropriately, I guess. It's called This Is Strategy, Creating the Conditions for Change. Seth, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and for being here.
What a treat. Thank you for taking the time, Jeff. It's good to see you.
I always value my time spent with Seth so highly, and I bet you do too. If you want to dig into this episode a bit more, you can go to the show notes page for this episode. It's at readtoleadpodcast.com/550 for episode 550. Seth's book is again officially out today and available wherever you buy your favorite books. And I hope you'll check out the Read to Lead community online at jeffbrown.me. Consider that free 2-week trial and see if you like what we have to offer there. After that, again, just $9 a month, jeffbrown.me. 550 episodes and over 11 years of the Read to Lead podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. I really appreciate it. That's going to do it for this week. Hope to see you next time. Until then, as always, remember, leaders read and readers lead.